Hello everyone, welcome to Succulent Palette. In today's video, I'd like to talk about how to make your succulents more colorful, or even how to bring out a specific color. I want to go beyond the actions that people talk about when stressing succulents and dig into the fundamental principles behind why it works, so you can customize it to what you'd like. Starting from the most basic, the coloration in plants come from the pigments that they produce. Here's a new friend from our local nursery that I just got over the weekend. Its green color comes primarily from the pigment's chlorophyll, which is what allows plants to absorb energy from light. Next, I have a red tips that I have selected as a really extreme example of how the pigment carotenoid can color your succulents. When you hear carotenoid, you think yellows, orange, and reds. If you're familiar with how red tips normally look, without any stressing, you'll know how different this looks when carotenoid is the dominant leaf pigment. It got this way after 6 months of getting lots of direct sunlight, breaking down most of the color pigment. But as you can see, the carotenoid remains. Finally, we come to anthocyanin. Anthocyanin is the leaf pigment that is associated with reds, pinks, blues, purples, and even black. So when some of you have asked me, how do we get our succulents to turn pink? The answer is anthocyanin. So now that we are familiar with the leaf pigments that contribute the colors that we love, we can discuss how to induce our succulents to produce more or less of each pigment in relation to one another. That's what I'm going to focus on in the rest of this video. I think the best way to understand stressing succulents is as a balance between growth and coloration. Before I understood this, I would read a lot of advice for succulent care that actually had conflicting purposes. As you can see in my blue elf, I didn't sufficiently limit growth to reduce chlorophyll, and I didn't do enough to promote anthocyanin. The result was a muddy mix of green and pink. After I learned how to promote plant health while also limiting growth, you can see I ended up with a much better expression of what I was trying to achieve. You can see that even more clearly on its baby, which had been grown to be colorful from the start. So, here's what I've learned about limiting growth. First, an important element is pot size. You'll see that I like to limit the pot size to keep the root system compact. My Echeveria mulleri is on the larger side for its pot. You can tell this because the leaves cover the whole diameter of the pot. Normally, I like to leave a bit more space than this around the margin. My Echeveria peacock is one where I have taken this more balanced approach, and this is generally what I do when I want to develop more color. This peacock variety doesn't need much stress to put on pink colors, and if you give it some growth conditions, it can reward you with multi-heads. Besides the diameter of the pot, you also need to consider the depth. You can see on my agavoides spicy that I'm using a deeper pot because I'm willing to give up some coloration for now to help it grow more. If I wanted to maintain the size and get more color instead, I could use a shallower pot of the same diameter. In the same vein, we can use a fast-draining soil to create this limiting effect. The recipe I use is on screen. Because the soil drains quickly, it can help the plant feel slightly underwatered, which stimulates the succulent's drought resistance. A soil mix like this has the additional benefit that it can help prevent root rot and other kinds of pests, but you still need to remember to apply a correct watering method for developing coloration. For more on the subject of watering, you can see my last video on how to water succulents. Next, There are the factors that more specifically help to increase anthocyanin relative to chlorophyll. If everything else is set up correctly, this is where the biggest difference is made. The first of these factors is temperature. Colder temperatures stimulate coloration because starting around 4 degrees C, the plants will stop producing chlorophyll and start producing more anthocyanin. This makes one of the biggest effects for coloration because it's doing both at the same time. That's why you'll see on my Instagram that much of the coloration effect comes during the winter and spring. In some circles, there is a lot of talk about day-night temperature difference. However, in my experience, just having a wide temperature difference is not enough. If it didn't get cold enough, the temperature effect isn't that big for anthocyanin. The second of these factors is providing relatively extreme lighting conditions to induce photoprotection. If conditions are right, succulents will break down chlorophyll and also produce more anthocyanin as a natural sunblock. From my research of published studies, there is a point where photoinhibition occurs, which seems to be around 6,000 lux. Above that, we may also see further anthocyanin production. I downloaded a lux measuring app to help give a point of reference in terms of the light intensity. This kind of app isn't necessarily an accurate light meter, but it's just to give you a general idea. Here's some of the measurements that I had taken. To conclude today's talk, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to follow along with the development of the latest batch of succulents I just got from my local nursery. Starting from the standard kind of plants that you would get at any garden center, I'm going to share the steps I take for coloring them up, and you can see the progression and timeline.